Hello, we are on part 5. We're going to do the operating lease over here. Operating leases, and this is just for the lessee. This is the one we're interested in. It's a little bit different of a scenario, so we wanted to cover that. So, but with respect to Excel, what we're going to do is go to the lessee schedule to get their VLOOKUPs. And there they go. Those are working. They're the same VLOOKUPs that we wanted before. And even though there's 6 years in the lessee operating lease schedule, we're going to use this as a starting point, the copy paste from the VLOOKUP for the lessee. We're going to have to point at the FV over here. That changes. And these should not change. And we're only working with lease 5. So we have some rounding error there. So it fell on the other side. Let's see, so we round. Let's see if we go, I think there's a round down. There, that'll work. So, all right. So even with Excel, sometimes you'll be off in the pennies, but that's the most error I've ever seen with Excel is $1. All right, now this schedule, this operating, you're only going to have lease 5. So actually, let me get rid of the highlight because we don't want you to really change that. Okay. Now, why is this an operating lease? Just really quickly to classify. So all these other leases were 4 out of 3 years at 75%. So they met the lease term greater than or equal to 75% of useful life. But also, if you would have taken the present value as a percentage of the fair value, they're all over 90%. So in the first case here, for the first test, the useful life test, it's 6 out of 10 years, which is below 75%. And if we take, let me see if I format it, this is percent. If we take the present value of the lease, including the guarantee, and you would have to take the full guaranteed amount, actually. So for the guarantee, if there were a guarantee, we'd have to do a different test. But anyway, when there's no guarantee, this works fine. And divided by 4 million, and that's 72%, which is less than 75%. So it's an operating lease. Now with an operating lease, the interest part is exactly the same. So even though we went to 6 years because we had a different lease term, it's still the case that we're doing the same exact process here. We get our nice 0. All right, now down here, we're going to put our payments in, but this is the amortization schedule. So let me just copy these all the way down, but I'm going to show you the amortization is adjusting entry. Notice these are all 12/31s. Okay, these are payment dates. These are 1/1. Now we could have a lease that has lease inception on 12/31, and that's fine. And then the adjusting date is the same as the payment date. There's no problem with that. But in this case, regardless if it's 12/31 or January 1 or July 1 payment, the adjustment date for the amortization is always on December 31. Okay. The ROU asset balance is the amount capitalized. So this is the amount capitalized as the first row. And as I mentioned in a previous video, it's kind of a no-no to have repeated payment dates in a schedule. But for people that are learning lease accounting, I always like to put this amount in here because if the question is what's the capitalized amount, and they're talking really about how much ROU asset is capitalized, it's this amount before the first payment. But if the question is what's the balance of the lease liability, which I just noticed I didn't spell right, on day 1, it's the amount capitalized less the first payment, if there is a payment in advance, which there almost always is. Okay, so those are two different questions. What's the amount capitalized? $2,872,063. What's the balance of the lease liability on day 1? 2,321,053. So down here on January 1, the balance is the full amount capitalized because amortization is like depreciation. It's a systematic allocation of an amount over time. Amortization means this is a non-tangible asset that's being reduced systematically over time down here. So if time hasn't passed, on day one, the full capitalized amount is the balance. Now, here's the next step that you do. You take the interest for a given year. So this is 1102, which is actually 01 interest, right? So this is a payment schedule, but you fully accrued that amount on 12/31, the prior day. So then we just take that interest all the way down. Now, with an operating lease, the amortization is there to plug the payment amount. And the amortization reduces the asset balance. That's what it's there for. So like depreciation, it goes to accumulate depreciation, but it's reducing the value of a tangible asset. This is reducing the value of an intangible asset, in this case, the asset created by a contract to lease an item. Okay, so there you have it. So if you're asked what's the amortization expense for 12/31/01, it's 411,747. 12/31/05, it's 519,821. All right, and if you don't have to separate it, you could either have interest expense and amortization expense or just lease expense. You could do it either way. For me, it's easier to do lease expense and then amortize the liability by this much and the asset by that much. All right, so that is the entire lease project. Not only I hope you learned some Excel or relearned some Excel, got more comfortable with some Excel, but also maybe hopefully you got a lot more familiar with all the different lease types, especially these different scenarios for these operating lease or for these finance leases for the lessee and for the operating lease.